In 1992, Paul Wolfowitz was asked to write the first draft of a new national security strategy. The most controversial elements were that the United States should be willing to take preemptive military action, use military force unilaterally to prevent the emergence of any future or potential rivals to American power, and to secure access to vital resources, especially Persian Gulf oil.
In 1996, a group of neocons wrote a report intended as advice for incoming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It called for a clean break with the peace process, rolling back Syria and removing Saddam Hussein from power. Amongst those who contributed, Richard Polk, Douglas White, now number 3 at the Pentagon, David Wormser, now in the State Department, and Mayrat Wormser.
It was no more than a mental exercise done in a think tank by a group of people.
In 1998, the Project for the New American Century wrote to President Clinton, urging removing Saddam's regime from power. 18 people signed, half now in the administration, including Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and his influential deputy, Paul Wolfowitz.
At the American Enterprise Institute, some of the finest minds in our nation are at work in some of the greatest challenges to our nation. You do such good work that my administration has borrowed 20 such minds.
Joined from Washington by Richard Pearl, the former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense, who's been described by some newspapers as the architect of the Iraq War.
How did you feel about being called the architect of the war?
Well, I mean, there's hardly a point in denying it. It isn't true, of course. But... And as far as the planning is concerned, I had nothing whatever to do with that. Nothing.
We are going to have to be involved for the next, I think, several decades in helping change the face of the Middle East.
It's very nice to sit around and say, we believe in the rule of law and we believe in the United Nations. Saddam Hussein is there, and he's a dictator, and he has weapons of mass destruction. And are you going to do something about it or not?
Some people say what you're really doing is making the world safe for capitalism. You know, you're backed by Mr. Murdoch, Fox TV. Front for capitalism?
No, I mean, not in my case. I'm much more interested in liberty and democracy than I am in capitalism. It's not about capitalism.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I went downstairs. One of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." "Why?" He said, "I don't know." I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" He picked up a piece of paper. He said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." There's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement.
There's no question but that there was discussion about Iraq, and it was in that context.
So Mr. Clark alleges that you were pushing to bomb Iraq immediately after 9/11 in response to that attack.
He's mistaken. Our planes were being shot at in Iraq, but in terms of connecting it the way some seem to want to do, it seems to me would be a misunderstanding of the situation.
But in the first 8...
I said the administration yelling won't help.
Did the administration will not help? Did the administration?
You don't hear me.
Did the administration ignore or? Thanks, Jim. Okay.
If you had known he did not have them.
I didn't know.
If you had.
I didn't.
If you had.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
How in the world could the professionals see what was happening and nobody speak out? How did these people so early on get so much power that they had more influence in those in the administration to make decisions than you, the professionals?
I'd answer you with 2 words, Vice President.
It had none of the professional standards, that didn't apply to the rest of the intelligence community.
It was a neoconservative propaganda office. So what was happening was a set of talking points originating from the Office of Special Plans was produced on a regular basis and updated on a regular basis. And those talking points in general were supposed to be integrated in with whatever we produced. And anything that we produced that went off the reservation, so to speak, policy-wise, would be deleted or changed. The final straw for so many people was Colin Powell's presentation, which of course very much filled with things from the Office of Special Plans in our documents. That's what we were told to say, knowing much of it was not true.
That group wasn't established because the intelligence community wasn't doing its job. It's that the policymakers, these particular ones in the Office of Secretary of Defense, didn't like the answer. And the answer was, there's no alliance. And that was a very well-documented answer. And there was a lot of other information that pointed in an opposite direction from all these scraps that Mr. Feisoff has put together and we later read about in the Weekly Standard. Evidence that showed, for example, that there was not training going on, that there were not contacts between Iraq and just about any Islamist you could come up with.
Do you think that the U.S. or UN forces should have moved into Baghdad?
No.
Why not?
Once you got to Iraq and took it over and took down Saddam Hussein's government, then what are you going to put in its place? That's a very volatile part of the world, and if you take down the central government in Iraq, it's a quagmire. The other thing was casualties. And the question for the president, in terms of whether or not we went on to Baghdad, was how many additional dead Americans is Saddam worth? And our judgment was not very many.